Well, I am here with Adam Ebberts, and we are here to talk about Keirsey Temperaments, the Keirsey Temperament model, and also his own unique perspective on it from clinical practice. So, Adam, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are and your relationship with KTM?
Yeah, so well, first of all, thank you for setting this up and for inviting me on. I appreciate that. I really enjoy this subject, almost to the point of alienating everyone in my life because I'm constantly running things through this filter. So I'm a licensed professional counselor. I'm licensed in a couple of different states, and I use Keirsey in my regular practice quite a bit. I was introduced to his book, Please Understand Me, Volume 2. This would have been in 2002, I think. So about 18 years ago. And just immediately, it's such a trip to like open it up and read things about yourself that you've never even conceptualized before, but the moment you read them, you realize they're true. And it just put me in kind of a weird headspace. But it was exciting. It was exhilarating. It was like, this guy knows more about me than me, and I want to learn what he knows. I mean, I want to consume it. And I couldn't get enough of it after that. And so, yeah, the rest is history. I've used it almost every day since then. And I got so familiar with it that I started noticing some things. We can get into this later. But I noticed some little tweaks here and some things there that didn't quite line up, didn't quite resonate. So I've made adjustments and changes to it over the years that have suited me and that have continued to sort of bear out in practice. So I've hung on to them, but for the most part, it's mostly intact. And I'm a big fan of Keirsey, especially over the Myers-Briggs. I think a lot of people confuse the two when you start, especially when you get into the 4 letters, and typing and stuff. But they really couldn't be, in my opinion, further apart from each other. In fact, Keirsey is a intentional departure from MBTI, which I'm totally grateful for, because if I was stuck with MBTI, I'd be clawing my eyes out, I think. But yeah, so that's kind of it in a nutshell. I use it every day, both professionally and personally. And there's just a ton of benefit. And it's one of those things that I wish the world understood. I think we would all get along with each other better. I think we would all cut each other a lot more slack, and I think things would just generally run more harmoniously if we understood these things about each other and made allowances for each other.
Well, everything you just said about, particularly about us understanding each other better and how that would impact the world. As an idealist type, an idealist counselor, that's my thing right there, is helping the world become better by increasing self-understanding and other understanding. So many issues I feel are caused by communication gaps. I feel it very deeply in my personal life, because some of the things running through my head, they're running through my head in one form, and trying to translate it out is very, very difficult.
Right.
And then when people are trying to communicate with me, oftentimes they're trying to find the words, put the words together. I can put the words together real well, but I can't always make it applicable. I can't always make it tangible for people. So I end up just like, it's a string of, unrelated, seemingly unrelated random stuff that makes sense to me based on my experience and whatnot. So, Keirsey is really helpful for me right now. Not only in terms of connecting with people around me, but also in terms of being able to communicate more effectively, being able to empathize more fully. It's a really good system. I do like Myers-Briggs quite a bit myself for certain purposes, but what I really like about Keirsey is that it's stripped down to the basics. Like it is your Swiss Army knife. You can use it with confidence, sort of on the fly, and you can just zone in. I also like how Keirsey wrote in a pretty concrete way. And I feel like he was very intentional about that. I don't know what his type was, but it seems like he was probably irrational.
He was, yeah. Yep,
yeah.
He was irrational.
Because he does write in a rational way, but when he breaks down the types, sort of gets into it, he made a strong effort to position them in very concrete, tangible ways so that he wouldn't just get caught up talking to people of his type. So Yeah.
And when you read, please understand me too, like that becomes really apparent when you get into the different type sections, like specifically artisan or idealist. He includes samples of language of people who he's identified as these types, but the things that he kind of highlights are definitely things that would resonate with an artisan who might be reading about an artisan, and things about a guardian who might be reading about a guardian. It's really cool, actually, the way he did that. So
Yeah.
I agree. I think it's totally intentional.
Well, and just being able to get in the headspace of another person, sort of feel what it would be like to be them. It really does change you, because the more you read about these different types, you can, it's like good fiction. You start to feel into the character, and then all of a sudden when you see people behaving the way they do, you're like, oh, I kind of feel this.
It's funny you mentioned that, because like having immersed myself in this for so long, like bad fiction is so obvious to me now. Like bad character writing is just, it slaps me in the face, and nothing will lose me in a film faster than all the characters written in a certain way, lacking kind of the depth of temperament type. So if you get into this, that's a potential hazard. Poorly written characters are offensive.
Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind when I think of poorly written characters is sort of like writing a character based on cultural stereotypes versus actual real personality traits, because I think that these personality systems are meant to sort of show you a little bit of a deeper understanding of a person, not just the surface level, because surface level can be very malleable.
Right.
So yeah, I could definitely see how that would contribute to good or bad fiction. I'm going to go ahead and jump into the second question I have for you, which is about the quadrants. So there are 4 quadrants in the Keirsey Temperament model, and I'm going to go ahead and do a screen share in just a second. Would you like to walk us through them and give a brief explanation of each?
Sure. Am I going to see that? Okay, yeah,
yes,
perfect.
Well, yeah.
Okay, so what you have here, this is the this isn't what you'll see in the book. This is the Keirsey kind of corporate facing website that they've created. But these are the different types. So you have the artisan, the guardian, the idealist, and the rational. And in the Please Understand Me Too book, he does a really good job of like explaining why these are different types, different temperaments. And they're broken down on kind of a matrix that he outlines.
But I can actually go down to the matrix. So
perfect.
I'll go and follow you and help to sort of aid where you're going with this. So
okay, no, that's perfect. Yeah, so yeah, this is the matrix. It's broken up by communication. That's language, right? That's how we communicate with each other. And these are predispositions, because these are things that you come into the world hardwired to gravitate towards. So you're either naturally a concrete communicator or an abstract communicator. And so what that means, concrete people tend to be very specific. They tend to be very data focused. Can I see it, taste it, touch it, smell it? Then it's something I'm comfortable talking about, and that's what I'll talk about. It's a lot of small talk. It's a lot of chit chat. And to an abstract person, it sounds like every adult from every Peanuts cartoon you've ever seen, where you just kind of get lost. This is something that I tell people to kind of pay attention to. Like if you're listening to someone talk and it starts to sound like womp 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 womp, there's a good chance that they're the opposite of whatever you are. Because the same's true for abstract people. When concrete people are listening to abstract people talk, we do kind of get lost. If you're an abstract communicator, you'll notice people's eyes kind of roll back up into their head, and you start to kind of worry about like, oh no, am I losing the audience? But so that's kind of the difference there, concrete versus abstract. One of the things that I like to do, if I can get into this for just a second, with clients or when I'm working with a couple, almost always you have one concrete and one abstract person, and which makes sense because they have some marital discord, and really what they have are communication breakdowns that plague all of us, right? But I'll ask them when what the last live music concert was that they went to, and to tell me about it. And the concrete person will tell me about how they went and saw this band, and it was great, and the guitarist shredded, he was amazing, the lights were great, and the sound was on point, the sound man did a wonderful job. These are all concrete details. And the abstract person will tell me about how wonderful it was to be in such an environment, to be with somebody I love, and just kind of take in the whole atmosphere. It's the meaning behind the details. And so that's just kind of a pretty clear delineation once you start noticing that this is how people use language. So that's the difference between concrete and abstract, just kind of a quick and dirty explanation for that. The other thing here is he uses the term action, which works. I prefer to refer to this as how we interact with our environment, but I mean, action, you could use that interchangeably. In the Please Understand Me Too book, he uses tools to describe this, but that never sat well with me. So I've taken some liberties with that. And so you are either cooperative or a utilitarian. Cooperative types understand that rules and norms and customs and expectations and institutions exist for a reason. And we largely respect all of those things, kind of for two different reasons. There's the idealist and the guardian type, who are both cooperators, but they're cooperators for different reasons. We can get into that later. And then you have the utilitarian type, which understands that all of these things exist, but the moment those things get in the way of my goals, then I'm quickly assessing how important they are and if I can ditch them or not. And again, the artisan and the rational are kind of utilitarian types. The artisan wants to know what they can get away with, and the rational wants to know a little more about like what they can control. Both of them want to know what the rules are so that they can break them or use them to their advantage. So those are the four kind of foundational, fundamental differences. And all of us, kind of what you were saying, that the genius of Keirsey is that it's neat, it's clean, the boxes are pretty well defined. And if we're being honest, when we're really kind of doing some self-assessment, you fit in one of these boxes pretty neatly. Some people will push back on that because they get hung up on behavior. And what I love about Keirsey, it's not a model of behavior. It's a model more, to me anyway, a model of motivation. It's a model of predisposition. Behaviors, we're all capable of mimicking any behavior. And so you can't look at somebody and make a temperament assessment based on behavior. And it frustrates me and drives me insane when people do that. But if you understand the type, then you understand what's behind that behavior. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. And actually, on that note, that sort of triggered for me a thought about how the different personality systems may emphasize different things along that spectrum, because I think one thing that interests a lot of people when they want to go deep with, say, like Myers-Briggs, because I like Myers-Briggs, but I like my own particular modified version of it, and
right.
and my modified version is based on other modified versions. So it's kind of like, it's like a Russian nesting doll. It's just one thing inside of another. And so for me, it's like the Myers-Briggs system tends to go a lot more into, I guess, the mechanics. And so it treats everything in terms of like different mechanical parts that could go together in a specific order and stuff.
Right.
And so that gets very complicated very fast. It's so easy to mistype. Like, you're going to have to spend probably, if you really want to get serious about it, you probably need to spend more than a year researching it before you really know, because you're probably going to mistype once or maybe more than once in that process, and you may not understand exactly what that means, and that's okay. For a system like the Enneagram, I view currently, I'm sort of looking at it almost more as behavior, because when I
right.
really look at how I relate to it, as a 5-wing 4, it seems to describe, 5 describes a lot of my behavior, 4 describes a lot of my motivations, but you get the picture. Each personality system sort of has a different set of uses, and I really like that you have a clinical practice where you're actually trying these things, in the real world, and you had said that you are a artisan type, correct?
Yes, sir. Yep.
Because that's a very artisan approach, I feel, is to just like, hey, what works, and exactly like you said, like if the system doesn't work and it doesn't work for you in your setting the way it is, you're going to tweak it to get the result you need.
Right. Yeah, I'm going to make it work. Like, and I'm going to use any tool at my disposal. Like that's part of this utilitarian thing. It's we'll use whatever tool works, not necessarily the tool that's designed for that job. Right. So I've been known to use a wrench as a hammer in a pinch. Right. I mean, like literally, it's whatever is available to me. If I can conceive of a way that it's useful, then yeah, I'm going to use it. You know, the rules or the design is secondary to me. It's what can I achieve with it. And yeah, so that my approach to this is very much that way. It's very much, this is just another tool in my toolbox that I can grab whenever. I've just been so enamored with this theory for so long that it's like, it's really become the filter through which I view the world and I interact with people. And so I apologize to anybody who meets me. I am judging you when when we meet. I am running you through these filters. I'm listening to language first. Are you concrete or abstract? And then based on what you're talking about, I can kind of pretty quickly decide which type you are, and I'm usually pretty good.
I think that's I don't think that's anything really odd or necessarily that has to be considered offbeat to be like doing that. I think it's just unconventional. It hasn't, been the way that we've been taught to deal with people. But right. I think if we were taught that our communication as a society would just go
oh yeah,
improve by 1,000%, and we'd actually see a ton of social problems alleviated because we would actually be listening to each other on a deep level and trying to accommodate each other as best we can. Because David Keirsey, he talked about this, and I really appreciated it. He said, we shouldn't be trying to change people from one type to another. So if you really listen to most people communicating, and I've been so guilty of this over the years, is we're trying to convince other people to join our team when they're not going to. For the most part, they're not going to.
Right. We tend to make people in our image, and we run into like serious frustrations and serious like interpersonal issues because we are motivated by different things. And if we don't understand that motivation, if we don't understand what's behind these behaviors, then when somebody behaves in a way that you just like, whoa, I can't believe you would do that. It creates tension and interpersonal problems. But if you understand, oh, this person's a guardian, so these actions actually make a lot of sense if this is what's going on kind of under the surface. And so that's, that's how it's useful. And I totally agree. If everybody knew this, that's why I'm doing this. That's why I'm sharing it with everybody. The people in my personal life are probably tired of hearing about it by now, but this is just, I want everybody to know this, because I want people to pay me compliments in ways that resonate with me. Right. And I want to be able to pay other people compliments in ways that resonate with them. And yeah, if we were all able to do that, then life would be so much smoother and better for all of us.
For sure. Yeah. So let's go and get into, and I'm sort of feeling the flow of how we're going right now. So I think I want to try and cover all the subtypes to some degree in this one shot. I sort of feel like we can do it, and we can do it fairly concisely so that, it doesn't become a long, rambling, intuitive thing, because that's the bane of my existence, is the intuitive, for me, it's the intuitive,
stream of consciousness.
Exactly. Idealist counselor monologue. It is the bane of my existence. It's the fundamental inner state that I have, and it's hard to communicate that to people. It's like my life is like one giant monologue, and then then there's a body doing stuff.
So Keirsey actually, he describes that the plight of the idealist as actor, director, and audience all at the same time.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. So you are on stage, kind of going through the actions, but you're also anticipating the audience's interpretation of what you're doing and trying to kind of allow for that. And then that inner monologue or whatever is the director standing off stage shouting orders at the actor. And there you are in this perpetual state of whatever. I mean, that would be exhausting for me, and I'm sorry you have to endure that, but
it is quite exhausting. And actually, I think that's where a lot of the INFJ stuff that you see on the internet, is very much angsty. Right. like, it's the eternal emo kid, who got really intellectual, that's like the
Yeah.
INTJ, which is in the Keirsey system, it corresponds to the idealist counselor. And I don't want to get into Myers-Briggs at all, but there's definitely a meme of that, and so yeah, trying to get more concrete. We'll see how successful I am at it.
But here's an example of kind of what we're talking about, right? Like being able to understand that about you. I mean, frankly, it's endearing. Like I get that about you. And so if you are, as you say, kind of monologuing or whatever, it's like there's a major allowance. So rather than, as a concrete person getting annoyed with that and being like, why aren't you talking sense? Like, no, I get that about you. And this is really where this theory is so stinking useful.
Well, and headed into, because I'm going to bring up the Guardians first, because they are considered to be the largest proportion of the population.
And they're the ones we all have problems with.
Well, and specifically as idealists and artisans, I think we, if anyone who's not your type, you're going to rub. Like, right. And even, I mean, to be fair, too, people within your type can rub you so wrong too, but generally you kind of like speak the same language, so it's like a inter-tribe warfare within your own camp. It's like you guys kind of know what you're doing and what games you're playing, and trying to one up each other with your own games. But then when it gets to another quadrant, you're kind of like, what planet are you from? Why can't you get with the program? Why are you so slow? I can't help but think that so many times when I get self-conscious, I'm like, Zach, why are you so slow in this context? And then in my comfort zone, I'm like, why is everybody so slow?
Right.
What can you do? So, but headed into the Guardians, I have family members who are Guardians. And as I came to understand personality types and sort of, I don't know, just more experience with people, I started noticing patterns. And, for me, I grew up in a very guardian sort of atmosphere. That was a lot of my upbringing. So it actually represents a huge comfort zone to me, which is something that I'm learning to embrace. I'm like, oh, there's something about this that relates to my childhood, relates to a sense of security, something that I pushed away for a long time. And now I want to re-embrace it in my own way. But during the process, of finding, my own voice and who I was going to be, I pushed back hard, went the other way and actually took on a lot of rational traits, to the point that I identified as irrational. I actually did a podcast episode exploring this, identifying as irrational, the one that I did with Justin Fowler. And so, now it's like, I sort of see that a lot of my traits were actually reactionary to my upbringing and to a lot of experiences that I had. So I think that plays a large role sometimes in the way that we identify and the way that we behave. And that's, again, like you said, that you're not as interested in behavior necessarily. So I'm going to just go ahead and give the floor to you to describe sort of the Guardian type in general, and then if you could go into the 4 subtypes fairly briefly and sort of try to cover that whole quadrant in about, maybe 10 minutes or so.
Okay. Yeah. So when you consider language, we have concrete versus abstract, and then the way that we interact with our environment or action, as Keirsey says, you have cooperative or utilitarian. The Guardian is a concrete cooperator. So they communicate concretely, and they love rules and institutions and norms and structure and whatever. The Idealist is an abstract cooperator. So different language, still prefers the rules, but for very, very, very different reasons. The Idealist likes rules and structure because they're interested in morale. They're interested in interpersonal relationships. If we're all doing the same things, if we all understand the rules, we're all following the rules, it minimizes conflict. The Guardian likes the rules because it's more about their own sense of security. They want to understand where the boundaries are, because for them to be outside of those boundaries and they're very subject to social shame. And so to be shamed for screwing up unknowingly, for accidentally violating some social faux pas, they don't want to do any of that. Their standing in their community is very, very important to them. And this is why, as kids, all of us have a guardian parent or two. Keirsey has their breakdown as like 50% of the population, which is really interesting as kind of a side note. I do this a lot. I have lots of tangents. I apologize. But concrete communicators, Keirsey estimates guardians at about 50% and artisans at about 25% of the total population, which means 75% of the people you encounter as an abstract communicator, as an idealist, or as a rational, 75% of the people you interact with are speaking an entirely different language from you. And growing up in that environment, there's a lot of issues. You grow up feeling not understood. And so what the idealist does, interestingly, I know we're supposed to be talking about guardians, but both types, the idealist and the rational, turn to language, but turn to them for different reasons. But it's in an effort to better communicate, usually with our guardian parent. The guardian, in my experience, my clinical experience, is the least tapped into how they feel. They're so concrete that they almost seemingly function exclusively in the physical world. And so when they have a feeling, when they have something that's kind of rising up, some emotion, they're immediately scanning their environment. They're so data and sensory driven that they're looking to their environment for what might be causing this. So there must be something here. And so they often lash out at people. These are the kinds of people that come home and kick the dog. There's a lot of displacement there. Whereas the idealist, and I contrast this with the idealist because the idealist child, guardian, parent is where I see the most conflict. But the idealist understands that emotions come from within. Like there's something going on inside me, and you'll turn inward to kind of figure it out. And so, this can lead to kind of some unhealthy behaviors too, where you just kind of turn inward for days on end. The guardian doesn't do that at all. The guardian is very much looking around for the reason, and you made me this and you made me that. And they often can't be dissuaded from that. So that's kind of a negative look at them. Now, they are very, very reliable people, very dutiful. You give them a job and they'll do it, and they'll do it well, and they'll do it responsibly, and they'll do it day in and day out without asking any questions. And as long as you are appropriately grateful for their efforts and for their hard work, they will continue to turn out good, solid hard work. These are very dependable people. They tend to, and this isn't a hard and fast rule, but they tend to fill professions like law enforcement, like middle management, some of your accountants, family financial planners. They're very good with numbers, very good with money, because they are responsible, because they are miserly in some instances, only doling out to those who deserve it. But Keirsey also describes them as the gatekeepers, and so these are the people monitoring the comings and goings of their institutions, of their families, of whatever, to make sure that only the people who are supposed to be here are here, and nobody who isn't. They're very protective. Lots of really great traits, really great qualities. Like I said, you know a dozen of them. Your one or both of your parents are guardians. Some of your kids are going to be guardians. Your kid that is helpful and will make his bed when you ask him to do it, and you probably have a guardian child there. But that's just kind of a quick sort of overview to get you kind of in the ballpark of maybe identifying the guardians in your life. I can geek out on this for hours, and so you're gonna have to slow me down here or hold up like a time card or something.
No, this is perfect.
I'll keep going.
You're right on cue, and I really appreciate and I'm not the first person to say this, I really appreciate the artisan communication style for certainly for informative stuff, and just if you want to have some sort of structure, because the the idealist way of communicating, it's so in the clouds that generally only other idealists like listening to it, because it'll just so tangential. So I really appreciate the flow. I think that it's good. But as far as the guardian types, yeah, it's so fascinating. And just the last few days, I've just been really digging into it, just in my personal life, and it's an idealist counselor trait. I've heard, repeatedly to try on different personalities. Like apparently that's something because we love perspectives. And so for me, like I'm always trying to, see if I can mold my behavior and my mindset, my,
Kind of put yourself in that frame.
also to adapt to my environment. Cause I think throughout my life, I've often put myself in difficult or sort of environments that are antithetical to my natural tendencies, and always told myself that it's the shift in perspective that is going to that is going to make the difference, and that I can adapt to anything, sort of that which has been incredibly painful, but also incredibly useful, because now I look at the temperaments, I'm like, okay, I see that in me, I see this in me, I can hop around, at least in appearance, at least for a period of time. It's not what I'm most comfortable with, but I can wear, different types when I need to. And growing up with, in a very, I would say growing up guardian, because really that's essentially what a lot of us have the experience of,
right.
Because even parenting itself, you have to have a guardian like mentality with parenting. There's no other real way. I mean, you can also incorporate in the others, but like that guardian side is just natural to the job of parenting. So that also lends itself to the experience of having a guardian. And then if you have a guardian, it's even more, more obvious to you. And so growing up in an I would say extremely guardian atmosphere, I learned a lot of those traits. And, it wasn't until I was able to get over my own bitterness from the idealist guardian sort of conflicts that I had, to see how much positive that had in my life, positive, effects it had. And so recently I've just been sort of looking to more like certain types. I really like the IS types. Well, in the IS types would be the inspector and the provider, I believe. Yeah. I really like those two, because when I tune into those, I can feel it and sort of like tap into that. And it helps me during my work days to be able to stay grounded, because I don't like being stuck in a physical environment, and work often does that to me, where I have to be very present, be very engaged with the concrete world. And so I've found tuning into, and I don't want to bring Myers-Briggs into really at all, but I have to say the SI, trait in introverted sensing, very related to the guardian temperament. I feel like I can sort of tune into that. Then when I tune into it, I just feel comfortable. I feel like I can do a task that's kind of tedious and feel into the details and the nuances. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting things about the guardians that I think are very untapped in terms of the actual potential of that quadrant versus the cultural stereotype, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think what you're describing, there's a kind of an analogy that I give to people to kind of describe this. I describe this as apps, like an app on your phone, like, because when we're looking at behaviors, we're really talking about things that you and I are both capable of replicating. So you show up for work and you've got to kind of tap into what you're calling sort of this guardian mindset, where you're there, you're dutiful, whatever. And so for me, I describe those as apps. So, you're an Android, I'm an iPhone. That's the fundamental difference. And you have an Android operating system, and I've got, I don't know what the iPhone uses, like Creamsicle or whatever the heck they're calling it. The operating systems are very different. And you have to go to an entirely different place to get your Twitter app than I do, right? I've got to go to iTunes. You can go to Google Play. The app looks the same, it functions the same, but how it's accomplished is very, very, very different. And so it's not so much that like I'm putting on Guardian as it is I'm running this program the way an idealist can run it. And it's the same for me when I go to work and I'm just dying because I hate work. I would rather play. That's me. I have to kind of tap in. I have to put on the hat. I have to run the I'm at work app. But this is where a lot of behaviorists kind of get in trouble, is because we look at each other and you're at work. And so therefore you must be motivated by these things. And I'm at work. I must also be motivated by these things. And it's not true at all. you know, what the idealist is seeking to get out of work, for example, and what the artisan is seeking to get out of work are very different things. So I hope that's not too far out into the weeds for you there, but.
No, absolutely. And, you know, the whole idea of, you know, having these different apps, I think that it's helpful because we can get locked into thinking, you know, there's sort of a personality determinism that happens a lot where it's like, I'm this personality, I'm never going to be more
therefore, yeah.
You know, and as an excuse to sort of hunker down and just sort of like say, I don't have to change, you know, because this is just who I am.
And that's why I like describing it as apps, because they write an app for your operating system. You are capable of change. You're capable of performing any task that I'm capable of performing. But how you're going to go about it, how you're going to accomplish it is going to be very different. And Fortune 500 companies that understand this are very efficient and very effective with their personnel, because I can't plug an idealist into research and development and expect him to perform like an engineer. You know, it's not going to happen. If I don't understand where you're going to be best utilized.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And you know, it's sort of like this too. I sort of think that you start with your type, and then you can kind of mimic the other types. And through the mimicry, because we learn through mimicry. I mean, so I think that's one of the things that kids, you know, why children learn so fast is because they are willing and able to mimic. And by mimicking, you actually, I think, build the neural connections to be able to tap into a specific mode, so to speak. But your default is, you know, you're gonna most likely have a default state. And so that's when I'm referring to my type, you know, as an idealist counselor, I'm referring to my default state. Like if I'm not trying, this is just what it is. And typically I start from that place and go around. Like that's what's doing the mimicry.
Yeah. Right. So, right. And one of the things that Keirsey's kind of big on is like you are and will always be an idealist, right? But you stretch out in these other directions and you venture into areas that other temperaments are more suited for sure. Yeah. And you're trying your best to kind of do what you can there, but you're still an idealist performing these functions, just as I'm still an artisan performing these functions.
Yeah.
But that's the wonderful thing. And again, it goes back to like, if we understood this about each other, then the things that come easy to you that are kind of in your natural wheelhouse that I'm sort of struggling with, like if you understand the nature of my struggle, man, you're going to cut me a lot more slack. You're going to be a lot more patient with me. And yeah, who doesn't need more of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into some of these other temperaments here. So we have the Artisan Temperament, which is your temperament. So if you want to go ahead and share a bit about that.
So this is one of the areas that Keirsey doesn't get he doesn't get artisans very well. I've gone in over the years and certain things haven't set well with me, and I've bounced ideas off of other artisans, and so you're going to get some variation here, kind of from what Keirsey says. But the big thing to understand about artisans is that what you see is what you get. That Keirsey describes artisan self-respect as coming from their audacity, like kind of the ability to say what everybody's thinking, but artisan will say it out loud. And it's true, we are audacious, but that's not really where the self-respect comes from in my experience and experience of many others. It's more about this idea of consistency of persona. And it's exactly that thing, that what you see is what you get. That the way that I present is kind of the way I am. And what that can be disappointing to some people who are coming to meet the artisan and you're looking for depth and you find that there's not a ton. Like it's not that my volume is lacking, it's a really shallow, wide pond, right? It's not a deep well of layers and understanding that you're going to uncover over time. Everything with an artisan is upfront all the time. And because of that, like I like to think we're pretty easy to get along with. I think Keirsey points out that we're one of the least stingy and least judgmental of all the types, which, you know, yay, I like that about us. What else? Artisans live in the moment. They're very here and now. There's a space and time orientation that each type kind of has. Artisan is here and now. So 10 minutes ago, whatever, it's gone. 10 minutes from now, we'll see when we get there, which gets artisans into trouble because we're not long-term planners at all. We're very tactical. So what gives me the immediate advantage right now, I'll take it. I'll worry about the consequences later. General Patton, I think, Keirsey cites as an artisan, one of my favorite artisans, who said, I would rather have a good plan today than a perfect plan tomorrow. That was Patton kind of sticking it to his rational war designers, saying, I don't want your plans tomorrow. We're moving right now. But we are very much action takers right now in the moment. We live for the moment. We are also like the Guardian. We're concrete, but we're utilitarian. So an artisan wants to know what the rules are so that we know what we can get away with, so that we can break the rules. And it's not malicious. It's just, we want to do what we want to do. And we don't want barriers to fun. We don't want barriers to excitement. We don't want barriers to the things that we want to accomplish. And so we'll understand what they are. We'll do our best to leave those barriers intact. But man, if you've got a loophole, we're going to exploit it. We're going to find it. We're going to exploit it. We're going to slip right through it. And there's nothing you can do about it. And it's good fun for us. Our spirit animal is the fox. And so I'm pretty partial to artisans, if you can't tell.
I really like your description so far. And if you have more, I'll let you go on. I just had to jump in real quick because, oh gosh, I may have lost my train of thought. Sorry, my cat is sitting on a bag, and he's making a lot of noise by sitting on the bag, kind of walking on it. And my wife's trying to keep the cat from making too much noise because my wife just walked in too. So I'm trying to like tune out the distractions and make.
I understand. I don't know if you've heard the kids banging on the door here, but
this is YouTube in 2020. I feel like people are used to this now. That like, hey, we're keeping it real. I feel like that's a very artisan thing. Because when you were talking, the thing that came to mind was radical authenticity.
So that's what the Idealist prizes. And so artisans and idealists are opposites, and opposites attract. Looking back across my life, like so many of my friends were idealists. And I realized that kind of in retrospect, but because, radical authenticity, like we're not even thinking in terms of authenticity. Like there's no effort to be authentic, but that's very attractive to the idealist who is seeking authenticity, who is seeking identity, and sees that as like the holy grail, right? Like, oh, you've found this thing that I'm looking for. When in reality, I don't even know what I'm supposed to be looking for. Like it doesn't even enter my mind space as like something I should be doing. It's just my state. It's just my constant state. But it's very attractive to the idealist because that's ultimately what you're on a path of self-discovery. You're on this this is your path for the rest of your life. In fact, the idealist space and time orientation is the pathway, and it is tomorrow, right? Like, where does what I'm doing lead me, and is it worthwhile? And if it is, then I can keep doing what I'm doing. Man, I don't even know what I'm going to have for breakfast tomorrow. Like it just doesn't come until it's in front of me.
Well, and it's really freeing to be able to understand. For me, the space time sort of, or the time orientations are so useful.
Oh yeah.
You could see it just real time because the Guardian's past focused. That explains so much. And then all the types of trying to bring everything into the present, except for the artisans. The artisans are just like present, and that's what you're talking about. Like there's no so I'll explain it like this too. I can't help but think that if any artisans who have ever sat down and watched a video from like Eckhart Tolle, or somebody who idealists and rationals tend to really like, oftentimes, certainly not everybody,
right?
A lot of us tend to like really value things like presence and meditation, anything to get us like centered in the here and now.
Stop and smell the roses.
Exactly. Like that's actually a thing that like we have to like think about. We have to think about being here. I have to think about letting my hair down because we're so focused on building the future,
right?
That we don't feel like we can actually merge, because if we merge, then we feel like we lose our vision. Like we could
Right.
lose what we
And you'll lose ground, right? Like the things that I'm looking forward to and the things that I'm working towards, if I lose sight of that, yeah, then it's like I'm standing on an escalator that's moving backwards. And if I stop for a moment, then I lose that ground. And then what was this all worth? You know, like I run into this with clients and stuff all the time. And it's something that I have to like keep in check too, because stop and smell the roses, you know, my initial thought is like, why aren't you already doing that? Like, and so when people come in and they do have these anxieties and they do worry about the future, like my instinct is to say, well, stop it. Like, how hard is it to not worry about the future? Just quit. But that's not helpful to anybody coming in except maybe the other artisan, but they don't tend to worry about the future. They usually are like drug addicts and like spend too much time in the here and now and kind of seeking pleasure. So it's yeah, I have to kind of keep it in check. You know, this temperament model really is like just a giant game of paper, rock, scissors where each type has strengths and weaknesses, and understanding them is super, super helpful just for you and for your relationships and for everybody else.
Yeah, and I sort of like how we've used the artisan as a bridge to jump off into the idealist. I really like how that's flowing right now. And flow, I always think of artisans when I think of flow. And it was super hard for me to come by, but like when I used to play more music, I used to play a lot of guitar and stuff, and I'm trying to get back into music, but it's hard for me to again prioritize the time and energy for it because I'm so focused on the future, you know.
Yeah. Whereas I steal the time. I do music as well, and if I'm not consciously trying to engage in something else, that's fun for me, and so I'll come in, I'll slip in, and then hours go by, and it's like not even a thing for me. I'm there, I'm in it, and then then I deal with the consequences of having wasted a day doing that. But in the moment, it doesn't even register for me, and so I have to be very careful of that, because I would spend all day every day in hobbies and crafts and interests and whatever if I wasn't, if I didn't have these other responsibilities, and if I wasn't constantly reminding myself of these other responsibilities.
Yeah, and I think gosh, it's so poignant because it's like, the idealist. I like to think that every idealist, has this fantasy of being an artisan and being given the self permission to be so, to just be yourself and not have to like feel this burden. But then again, the idealist lives to carry the burden. It's in our blood. So it's like, and we sort of know that like there's some pot of gold at the end of the rainbow that we are chasing. And, being an idealist, you believe it. Whether or not you believe it in the moment, whatever keeps you going on the idealist path is that pot of gold, that delayed gratification. And so I think for an idealist, it's important to always tune into that. But then also, like, if you're stable enough, and I think most idealists are actually stable enough to engage in artisan activities and go to the party with the artisan friends. For me, it's like I'm the guy who needs to take the shot of alcohol. I'm the guy who needs to just do the bungee jump. Because I'll be okay. Because being an idealist, I'm gonna kick back into future mode very quickly. So that's something that I think we can learn. And likewise, I think the artisan doesn't have to fear, thinking about the future, because they're well equipped to, tap into their authentic values because their authenticity is so present for them.
Well, and the artisan's very adaptable. And so what you just said is actually a really good reminder for me, that we don't need to fear the future. We don't need to fear plans, because we do. In fact, the heavier my schedule gets, just the crankier I get, the more anxiety kind of builds in me. I need things to be open-ended so that I have options, because we are adaptable. We need to be able to make decisions in the moment. And the tighter the schedule gets for the artisan, the more kind of confined I feel. But it's a good reminder for me that like I can tell myself going into that situation that because I'm adaptable, I can take advantage of moments as they arise and just trust that they will. So I appreciate that. That's something I'll apply just kind of to my life, because I've been feeling that lately, with work and stuff and the clients that I see. Things have gotten really, really tight just with COVID and everything else. And So I've been feeling that crunch. So I appreciate that. I will apply that. Hopefully that'll help me not like try to cancel all my appointments just so I have options, you know?
Well, I'm glad to hear it. I think, you know, to be honest, as an idealist, and I think this is actually pretty common for most of the idealists, because most idealists I know are not really good at planning either. It's sort of funny. It's like, because we're living in the future, but like, that's the thing. We're actually like,
Right.
like it feels like we're living. In fact, you know, there's a lot of, because idealists, you know, we tend to gravitate towards topics like spirituality, anything esoteric, anything weird. You know, we're all with it, you know, and oftentimes it doesn't have a strong logical coherence. It's just like it speaks to us, so we latch onto it. And you know, there's often talked about, you know, the higher self or the twin, and I can't help but just think it's the future consciousness, and that, you know, we're having that, you know, inner dialogue. And that's not to reduce it, because I'm an idealist, so I'm never gonna be a complete reductionist rational. I tried that, didn't work for me. I like to keep the imagination open, you know, and just to have it be there, just open. And so idealists want to live in their imagination and bring that into the world. But to do that, we kind of have to wrestle with that planning, with the structuring, with the artisan approach of just do it, you know, is the best thing that I've ever taken on. That's why with this channel, I'm just do it, pumping them out. You know, that's what I want to do, is I just want to pump stuff out and trust that my natural orientation towards perfectionism will win out.
Yeah, and that's the artisan way, man. Let's just throw it all against the wall, see what sticks. Like, just do it, try it. No harm, no foul, and we'll keep going. So that's great. But kind of into the idea, I know we've kind of jumped back and forth between artisan and idealist, but this, I mean, it's you and I talking, and so it's natural to kind of do that. I think we've hit on a lot of kind of the idealist. Keirsey talks about the idealist as everyone, male and female, every idealist is a romantic. And that's not necessarily like sexual romance, but I think it's more this idea that you're kind of describing, that it's grandeur, it's mystery, it's intrigue, it's how would you describe it? Like, it's fancy, it's imagination, it is the weird, it's the esoteric, it's the spiritual, it's just these kind of big, beautiful subjects and ideas, and you could probably speak more to this. But every one of them.
I'll go ahead and jump in with that, because just what you said, you know, you know it's right when somebody's speaking it, and you just want to jump in because you're like, yes, 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 and yes. Right. And let me add to it. So that's what I want to do here, is because you just sparked me right there. You got my attention. I also think, and I think this is why a lot of idealists tend to struggle with depression and anxiety. One is the future focus, which is just obvious. If you're living so much in the future, you're constantly concerned about the instability of life, because
you're setting yourself up for anxiety for sure.
It's inevitable. It's not a if, it's a when, it's a how do you deal with it. So one of the things that stood out to me and makes me think of that in particular is that I had this feeling growing up that everything was horrible. Like it just grew on me over the years. And by the time I hit my teenage years, just the darkness, suffocating darkness of, like, you know, suffering, you know, like idealists, we can't like get suffering out of our heads. It's the demon that follows us, you know, but we never, because we're not jumping in like the artisan does, we're not feeling the suffering, you know, in a physical way so that we can overcome and face our fears, where, you know, I think the artisan would not shy away. The artisan's just like, you know, if there's something bad and scary in the world, so what? Like, if I face it, you know, I'll face it and I'll overcome it. But like the idealist is like, it's just going to haunt me. And so I'm going to imagine a better world, and I'm going to make that happen. I don't know how, but I'm going to bring that into reality.
And a lot of the idealists, especially kind of children, young adults, you know, teenagers, if they can't do that, then they'll escape to things that kind of do that for them. So fantasy novels and films and kind of things like that, like really get sucked into kind of that world and sort of wish to live there. But yeah, most of them don't have any problem kind of living in kind of this, I don't want to call it a fantasy world, but it sort of is, but certainly a better world than reality currently has to offer. And it becomes a place of longing and a place of acceptance that maybe you don't get in your waking life, a place of power that maybe you don't feel like you have in your waking life. The problem with that, because again, we all have these positives and negatives, is that idealists are very prone to projection, because that fantasy realm gets so strong and so desirable. When you meet people, somebody like an artisan, for example, there's a tendency to sort of put on them qualities that maybe that don't exist, but that we want this person to have so bad that we kind of convince ourselves they must. And so idealists of all the types stay in relationships a lot longer than they should, because there's a lot of kind of projected qualities onto this person that we're just waiting to see emerge. And Keirsey talks a little bit about this as well, that eventually over time and things, that facade, or that the what's the word I'm looking, I don't know. It starts to deteriorate. The rose-colored glasses was what I was thinking of. That starts to fall off because people consistently disappoint and they consistently fail to kind of meet those expectations. And then you kind of slide back into that reality that I've been trying to escape, and there's kind of a funk and a depression, and then it's like, okay, how do I get out of this relationship and still have the moral high ground and kind of walk away feeling good about my decisions to cut this off? And you can tell I've had relationships with idealists.
It's sort of like the idealist as opposed to the artisan. The idealist is looking for a future hit of dopamine. They're looking for the hope. They're looking for something that's like, imaginative rather than accepting what is. And I think that that's a big journey and work for it. And that's personally been a big part of my journey, is like, I don't want to be projecting on other people, even though I do. So when, when my ideal vision of people, starts to wear off and I start to just deal with people as they are, I try as best I can to adapt, to understand myself. And I think every idealist has to learn to channel all that future-based energy into something constructive that they can own, that isn't dependent on everybody else around them modifying themselves for.
Absolutely. And I think that's really important. I'm glad to hear you say that, because that's something that we try to work when I work with idealists, that you really kind of want to instill in them is, how much of this can you own, and let's stop kind of depending on everybody else to be a certain way, or to be a certain type, or to be, to engage you in certain terms. Like, what can you do? What can you affect? And take ownership for, kind of how you're viewing things, how you're using people, etc. So that's good. I'm glad to hear you say that, because a lot of people don't come to that conclusion on their own, and so I'm impressed that you've been able to.
Well, I appreciate that. And for our listeners, I promise we will get to rational very soon. Rational and Guardian, I'll just say, like, I think that they're going to get less airtime in this episode, because we have an idealist and artisan, and we're jamming.
Right.
You get an idealist and an artisan jamming, like, stuff just flows and it just happens. So I just had this thought, and I think that I just really want to say it, because I think that the artisan and the idealist both represent the eternal child in different ways, because the artisan is like the eternal child in terms of that eternal playfulness. Yep. Never giving up that exploratory, energetic side of childhood. Like, you didn't just grow up and become serious, say, like the Guardian or the Rational. And the Idealist, on the other hand, and that's not to say immature. The eternal child is an archetype of a
absolutely
developed person who has been able to channel that and hold on to it, not let it die, and bring it into adulthood in a responsible way. So the Idealist is very close to that, but they're the eternal daydreaming child, like sort of the introvert child, more likely, on average, to be the introvert child who didn't go out necessarily, or maybe felt rejected, something was off, some sort of, I can't help but think a lot of idealists in my experience with them have dealt with trauma. It
Yeah.
seems like that happens a lot because the dissociation is a huge issue,
Yeah, well, and so Keirsey describes the artisan as excited and the idealist as enthusiastic, which to me sound like two sides of the same coin. But it's why, my favorite bandmate was my bass player in a band I played in years and years ago, but he was an idealist. And he was my favorite because my excitement would activate his enthusiasm. And his enthusiasm would then feed my excitement. And it was kind of this flow that he and I could jam for hours, man. And like the rest of the band's like, okay, are we done? And so they would leave and he and I would just keep writing music, and we'd do that forever because it was fun. And I think for him, it was an escape, right? It pulls him into the moment and kind of away from all the cares of the world. But for me, it's like, this is just where I live. So, but I like that. And I think those are those childlike qualities. Also, the idealist is very credulous. Like, you want to believe, you're willing to believe. And it's why idealists have a very rich inner life, especially with things like spirituality and all of that, like, because you naturally want to believe, and that belief is very childlike.
Yeah.
You're hardwired that way. And so, that's why we get along, I guess.
Well, and for me, and this is where I'm going to bring in the rational, because that's a perfect segue, is that I'm thankful that I had a really, it was really hard for me, but like I had a foray, like I grew up Guardian, with that atmosphere.
Yeah.
And so I sort of was wearing a lot of that was not like me. So, I had a lot of authenticity issues to overcome, to say, is this me? Is this, but also too, I framed a lot of it in terms of objective reality. So very much caring about the state of the outer world, which is an idealist thing to, just like feeling human suffering very acutely, I think, within yourself, and then projecting that onto others. Sometimes it's accurate. Sometimes we're just seeing suffering where people are just living their lives and enjoying. And we're the ones who are just like miserable because we're doing it to ourselves. That happens too.
Right. But it's kind of that unhealthy empathy.
Exactly. And there is a lot of that goes around. So going from that Guardian place to like rebelling against it, because it wasn't me, it was a part of me, but not me. And so I flipped to rational defensively. And I've spent the last 5 years or so kind of like working my way out. Like only within the last year do I feel like I've stepped back into the idealist thing of a big part of it was allowing myself to believe in a weird way. Like, but now I know, and I think that the mature idealist can separate their beliefs and their hopes and their imaginations from what can be proven, and be able to see both sides of the coin and just say, these things that I hold very closely to me, these beliefs, these imaginings, these worlds that I put a lot of stock in and that I resonate with, don't have to be proven objectively or explained to other people, or even like we can choose not to put all our chips into them either, where we fall fell into the rabbit hole and like commit to some very niche understanding of the world. We can sort of say all these possibilities are there, and I sort of believe that there's a truth to it. But because of the rational side that I've sort of like drilled into myself, like I'm very acutely aware of what is a logical thought, something that can be proven in a logical sentence construction and logical framework that has accuracy, versus say, choosing to believe something. And so I try to just separate the two, and that's a huge plus for any idealist, I think.
Well, because one of the struggles that an idealist has is you are very intuitive. And so sometimes you just know something because you know it. And for a rational, that's not good enough. Like there has to be a reason that I know it. And they'll go to great lengths to kind of explain it. Rationals drive me nuts. I love them, but they drive me absolutely insane because I just don't have the patience for it. I'm here and now. I don't need to spend 30 years while you set up your point and then make your point and then expect me to respond in kind. And I just say, I'm not going to do that. Thanks. And then they get frustrated because they spend all this time and energy because the rational is very efficient and they want an appropriate return on their investment. But the idealist, you instinctively understand things, and the rational explanation isn't always available to you, no matter how hard you try. Sometimes I got to go with my gut on this is good enough. And Keirsey talks about this as well, that you trust that intuition and you're willing to act on that intuition. Whereas a rational trusts logic. And if something logically follows, then it's going to give them a lot of confidence in kind of what they're doing. If they can look at it and say, yes, this now makes sense. But where the rational suffers is in the very thing that makes idealists so great, I think, is in your willingness to believe, whatever it is, that credulous nature. You want to believe, you're willing to believe, you throw yourself kind of into belief, and rationals won't allow themselves to, because there are just too many variables, there are just too many unknowns. And I suspect, if I had to guess, and I don't know you that well, but that probably played a bigger part in sort of settling into the authentic idealist you. That sometimes, when you're dealing with a subject like belief, and we don't have to get out into these weeds or whatever, sometimes, because that's how I feel, is all you've got, right? Like that's all you can kind of rely on, is just, I believe this. I believe that this is a thing and I can't explain it. All of us have had experiences we can't explain. Unexplainable experiences drive a rational nuts, and they'll obsess about it, and they'll come up with kind of a post rationalization for why things happened and how they happened and whatever. And for the rest of us, certainly the idealists to the greatest extent, artisans to a lesser extent, it is because it is a good enough explanation. But the rational, that doesn't fly. And especially if you're trying to make a point, and especially if you're arguing with them online, we've all had those experiences. Dude, so, these are the guys that come in with the text wall, and you're just like, I'm not reading that. And I apologize to all the rationals that are going to tune into this, but I mean, sorry, not sorry, kind of.
Well, and I did so much text walling. I mean,
yeah. Well, you have to. You have to.
That's the thing. It's like I did so much text walling as a self-proclaimed rational. Like from that, frame of reference, really in hindsight, I was just learning it. Like again, mimicry and then learning. And then all of a sudden I've been able to assimilate a lot of it, and it's been good for me. But the period of time was like not very great for me, because it was very much wearing the wrong hat and I was the only one that didn't see it was the wrong hat.
Well, and then you get a rational who is actually kind of logically minded, and they come in and they're pretty ruthless when they start picking apart an argument. And so you get a lot of that, and then you're kind of in this like, oh crap. Like for me, I look at that and I'm like, that's a waste of my time. I'm not even going to engage, right? But for other types, it's like, okay, I need to be understood, right? Because you're the abstract person. You'll kind of get sucked into these things. So I feel like I need to build up the rational a little bit, though, after kind of
go. Yeah. If you want to build it up a little bit, because I have a lot of appreciation for. I mean, I identified it as it for about 4 or 5 years, so I have a lot of appreciation for it. But I also see all of the pitfalls. So go ahead and share what.
Well, again, because it is this paper rock scissors game. So I led with some of my own irritations where the rationals are concerned, but they are very efficient. And this is a great thing about them. Like if you have a problem to solve, and you have time constraints and a budget and kind of all of these parameters, they're very good at fitting all of that together and coming up with ways that you can streamline a system. And in fact, if you have a system that maybe is in place and it's always been in place because that's how we've always done it, and you want to streamline it, throw a rational in it and let them go crazy and just say, tell me what's wrong with it. Tell me how to fix it. They will be in hog heaven, and they will deliver for you a streamlined, super efficient version of whatever. I don't care what system it is. If they fully understand your system, they will quickly and very effectively identify the flaws in your system and offer you solutions for your system. And that's one of the things that I absolutely love about rationals, but it is a double-edged sword because they spend a lot of time in the talking about it phase and less time in the doing it phase, which is where I want to live, right? Is in doing it. And so I like, okay, it's been long enough. Let's get it going. But they're great that way. Their logic usually is pretty sound, pretty good. And when they are convinced of something, they're a very strong champion for that thing. Like conviction is very important, but it's a logical conviction. It's different than it is for you or I or for the guardian type. Guardian is convicted to tradition and authority, whereas the rational is very much, if it makes sense, then we'll accept it and we can go. And what I like about that in counseling practice is when I get a rational and when they come in, like my counseling approach is very different if I'm working with an idealist or if I'm working with a rational, which for me has been invaluable. Understanding the Keirsey temperament model, that has been worth its weight in gold. Just understanding that when I have an idealist in front of me or a rational in front of me, I'm going to use a different tool. But what I like about the rational is when you dive in to something. I use a lot of REBT, which is rational emotive behavioral therapy, when I'm dealing with rationals, which is like cognitive behavioral therapy, but they appreciate it a lot more. It's a lot more following their logic chain and identifying for them the flaws in their own logic or allowing them to, disputing it with evidence. And because for them, logic is emotion. You know, we talked about the guardian, emotion is external. For the idealist, emotion wells from within. For the artisan, we have emotion, but we stay one step ahead of it. Like, because we're in the moment, we can move into that next moment and not have to deal with it anymore. So we don't confront emotions. Artisans don't. But for rationals, logic is emotion. And if you can logically follow and point out a kink and get to that kink, it's an emotional response that they have to that. And that's been really, really fun in therapy to understand that, because just understanding that, and I'm going back and forth here, but just understanding that has saved me months and months of time with a client, because I'm not spending 6 months trying out these different interventions. I can just say, oh, you're rational. We're going to do some REBT and we're going to get right down into it, because Albert Ellis was a rational. You know, Maslow was an idealist. And so on his hierarchy of needs, what does he put at the top? Self-actualization. Right. Yeah. This pursuit of self, this realization of who I am. It's that someday thing that I'm going to discover. And so I'll use different approaches that way. But so the rational, kind of in the nutshell, the idealist and the rational are both interested in what Keirsey describes in personology, which is his follow-up to Please Understand Me Too. Are interested in what he calls remote consequences, which is that future orientation, that everything I'm doing right now is going to pay dividends in the future. Whereas the guardian and the artisan are, what I'm doing right now pays off right now. And so rationals are also kind of in the future. They're also utilitarian. So the artisan wants to know what the rules are because I want to get away with stuff, because it is kind of a playful nature. The rational wants to know what the rules are so that he can command the elements and the space and make it do his bidding, right? Like, I want to be in charge. You know, exactly. The wizard.
Yeah.
Yeah, the wizard. Yeah, the magician.
And I think that's what's always attracted me to it. And that's why, you know, I do resonate. It's funny. I resonate with that archetype. And that's where, you know, I guess as an idealist, I give myself permission to believe I can do anything I want.
Right.
So, you know, I mean, within reason, you know, while acknowledging, you know, my obvious limitations, you know, my shortcomings, but like, I want to believe, you know, I can try on a hat and see what happens, you know? And so, when I sort of embraced the rational side of life, you know, that just became like a lifestyle for me. And and it was very stressful. I was trying to channel all my emotions into logic, and that,
right.
It's not a good channel for emotions. I've learned it. Just, you can't.
Well, not for you. Yeah.
Not for me. Exactly. That's a very good point. It wasn't right for me. But what's interesting is the appeal of it, I think, was always power at the end of the day, because it was a defensive thing. And so even now, when I see a nice, clear cut, like logically consistent, cutting wall of text, especially some sort of like comeback to somebody who I think, like, so let's say somebody posted something obnoxious and they had errors in their logic. Like, I got really good at finding those things, maybe not as good as like a hardcore rational, but like I got really good at just that, internet disputation.
Right.
And because I practiced it so much that I could sort of mimic it well enough, that there is a hit when you're able to do that, because you feel powerful, where maybe in your life, you're just, if I'm in a physical room with somebody, I'm a small dude, I grew up, nerdy and geeky and into music and stuff like that. I wouldn't have the confidence to just, shout in somebody's face, but man,
Right.
some anonymous person on the internet, tear them to shreds. Just like,
Yeah.
there's an appeal.
Yeah, well, and when I am confronted with a wall of text, I don't care how concise it is. I just throw a meme at it and say, nah.
That's the artisan diss that is.
It is, yeah. I'm just like,
but it's gotta be witty, yeah, and I think you know that.
Well, yeah, absolutely. It's got to be witty, and it does. It disarms them, because if it's not witty, if sometimes it's just like, yeah, I didn't read any of that crap. then they get like, kind of that nerd rage. And
Indifference is a real, because
yep.
they want you to be triggered, and that's why rationals and guardians tend to get into it the most. Because the guardians will be offended by their ideas being questioned, and the rationals will be offended that there could be any constraints on their ideas whatsoever. They want to be able to throw out any possibility, even if, no matter how horrendous it sounds, they want to be able to say it.
And if you disagree with it, you better have a logically concise reason for disagreeing with it. And you need to lay it out in 12-point font, single space, 10 pages. And it better make sense. And then my blog is going to respond. And we're going to go back and forth for 10 years. And we're never going to settle on anything. And
I had a 2-week text exchange with somebody. It was during the most unhealthy period of time of my life, that I was just on Facebook going back and forth with, multiple paragraph comments with this one guy who was like my alter ego, and I think I hammered out so many things through that single, like, 2-week back and forth, that it helped me to eventually just move on from the whole text block debating thing, because I got it out of my system.
It's funny is you're gonna get text walls on your videos now on this episode. You're gonna get.
I'm looking forward to that. I want those rationals. Any rationals out there, like, I appreciate that. Go ahead, just do it.
Yeah, that's funny. So an interesting thing about rationals, kind of while we're on the subject, though. There's a tendency, I've encountered lots of rationals, and the curious ones are a lot of fun, but to you rationals who may be listening, you come off a little harsh sometimes, and I don't mean this critically, and I understand. So what a rational will do is, if you present yourself as some sort of an authority on some subject that maybe they don't know much about, they immediately start poking. So like I've had rationals approach me about temperament specifically, as I've kind of shared it. They don't know much about it. They don't have much context for it. So they start deep diving and challenging things that you're saying, but they're probing. They're not asserting a belief, contrary to what you're saying. They're asking questions and they're probing your depth, because what they're trying to decide is, are you a resource in the future if I need to learn more about this? And so I have rational friends who kind of circle in and out of my life when they want specific information, when they want to understand specific things. Usually it's about this subject. But in the moment it's like, why are you challenging me on that? You don't know anything about this. Like, why are you being a jerk? Why are you questioning what I'm saying? Like, there's kind of this tendency. And so I recognize now a certain playfulness in it from them, but it wasn't always that way. And so the rational has to be kind of careful about that your probing is a little off-putting for some of us, because we do kind of bristle because we are feeling challenged unnecessarily. At least I was, and I've seen it happen between people as I've watched interactions. That's a lot of fun when you've been doing this for 18 years to like sit back and watch people interact. And you're like, oh, this one's a guardian, this one's this will be fun, and you watch them kind of do that. Yeah, but I've seen that happen in other circumstances, and I've seen people bristle, and I've seen relationships kind of come to an end over things related to that, but even specifically that, where the rational is just probing for more information and testing whether or not you're a reliable source for this subject. And so I appreciate that about them. I recognize that they do that, but it doesn't always come off as good-natured.
Well, and what I found over time, what eventually led me to go, I'm not really irrational, and I'm starting to recognize this more. Well, one, it was the study of Myers-Briggs types. That was what did it for me, because I was already like, I had even described myself as on this line, right there between the rational and idealist. And as I learned more about the idealist counselor type, we are often misunderstood as being rationals because using the Myers-Briggs dominant function,
right?
Again, not to bring Myers-Briggs into it, but I'm going to bring it in for a moment.
No, that's fine. That's your frame of reference. That's fine.
It's a frame of reference. It's pertinent, so I can't not add it in here. Is using NI, dominant introverted intuition.
Mm-hmm.
The way I would describe it to somebody, and this is just my experience, it may not be universal. I may be completely projecting what NI is and all of this. But the way that I understand it and see it, and sort of the way that it's been sort of confirmed with certain other people who seem to have this too, there's a constant stream of thoughts that's linking one thing to another in an associative way, because intuition is so associative.
Yeah.
And so it's not following a logical train.
Right.
But our logical function TI is in there enough to sort of check for logical consistency and refine. And so we're building this web of associations that, because it's almost a never ending monologue, it gets extremely complex in a way that can't be conveyed, and not complex in the sense of logically coherent, like a theory. It's not like that. Like, that's where the whole knowing something without being able to explain it. It's because all these associations, like, we got all these dots, but we can't look at the whole thing. But we sort of know there's like a general thing, and we feel like it's worth pursuing. And we also feel like it's extremely logical. So when we try to talk to rational about, for instance, I have this innate trust in reincarnation, but I couldn't prove that for the life of me. I can only show that there's no reason to say that it couldn't be the case. It's just, so for a rational, they need the theory to support the idea. For a idealist counselor, we're completely comfortable with an insightful idea that resonates in our body, and then we may actually work to build theories to support it. That's something that I've seen idealists do.
Oh, and I like that you describe it as a web, because I think this draws the imagery that very clearly kind of differentiates the idealist mind from the rational mind. So if the idealist mind is a web, the rational mind's a grid. And that's, I really like that imagery. I'm going to steal that and use that from now on, because the rational, when you ask them about something, it is like they scan their brain for the XYZ axis, and they find that memory, or they find that thought, or they find that theory, and then they provide for you all the context clues that will make that relevant to you and pertinent. Some rationals are very good at this and do this very concisely and only provide what's necessary, only the context that's necessary for you to understand the point. Others do text walls, right? And have to provide mountains of context because they want to be understood, just like you, because they are abstract as well. And 75% of the world, they're also used to dealing with, which is interesting because you internalize it differently. Idealists internalize it as, I must be a bad communicator because 75% of the world doesn't get me. Rationals internalize it as, everybody's stupid. Like, everybody else is an idiot. I make perfect sense.
I took that on for a while, and I'm still working my way out of it. The more I learn, and I think you represent this so well too, from the artisan standpoint, because I got to the point where I started to see this more and more. It's not that somebody is unintelligent if they don't grasp your point. Right. It's either that they don't have the it's either that it's almost always that they're just focused on different things, and they've been focused on different things for so long that they literally couldn't care less, and they would have to build up to a scaffolding, a structure to be able to understand what you're saying. So it's more a matter of just preference at the end of the day.
Well, and where the rational is concerned, sometimes it's a matter of definition. So rationals, in their effort to be understood, because again, they are abstract and they're living in a concrete world, they narrow their focus on what words they use and what they mean. So when they use a word, they have a very specific meaning attached to that word. And they don't always share that with you. This is why legal briefs, lawyers by and large are rationals. This is why legal briefs have definitions at the beginning of them, just so that everybody gets on the same page and knows exactly what we're talking about when we use this word. But so much of your communication breakdown with a rational is because we just don't share the definition. You'll use a word differently than I will. And if I'm not totally on board with how you're using these things, it's the assumptions snowball. I've started from a different premise than you entirely. And we end up at very different places just from a little gap in understanding of these base words. We end up miles apart. Whereas
go ahead.
I was going to say the idealist, rather than specific words with specific meanings, you'll use them, but you'll use all of them to convey an idea, right? Like, and so
words, like we take advantage of words. We're like, that's absolutely the thing, and that was a huge shift for me. And when it happened, it was really freeing, and then it became very, very hard to like communicate with my rational friends at that point, because the way that I see it is that what I started to see is that my rational friends were really believing in actually the concreteness of the words. So for them, they had very specific definitions and grids, and they really believed in the definitions and grids. Like even though maybe they would say they wouldn't, they would consider you to be like denying objective reality, if you didn't agree with their grid and their words. And I would come in and I would provide, like, say, a radical skepticism argument, or Munchausen's trilemma, something to break down the idea of logic itself, the idea of language itself, which never did me a whole lot of good getting into those discussions. They get really weird very fast. Because basically you're using words to break down the idea of using language as which is actually an artisan thing. At the end of the day, you're getting into the present moment. That's what a lot of idealists, I think, tend to do sometimes, that they embrace the absurd to break into the present moment, because you're like, oh my gosh, none of this makes any sense. Boom, I'm here in the moment.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it gets to that space, and I'm just like, I'm going fishing. See you guys. Let me know when you got it figured out.
We're trying to get there, so we're talking about a strategy to get to exactly where you are. So you're like, why would I try to get there?
Right. Yeah. No. While you guys are figuring this out, I'll be doing something else. Can't tell you where I'll be, but I'll know when I get there.
And the idealist, we like to get meta very quickly. That's where we always lose people, when we go meta. That's the thing that idealists have to get over.
Well, because you're searching for the meaning of everything. Like everything has to have meaning, or is it even worthwhile, right? And if I can find the meaning in something, then I can spend time in it. And that's the idealist pastime. That's where you want to live, is in meaning. It goes back to kind of that romantic notion, right? The things have to have meaning. They have to matter. They have to be big. And is it contributing to who I'm becoming? So, So we started out, we were like, we'll do 10 minutes here, 20 minutes here. We've been at it a while.
I was going to say, like, I'm going to have to call it, I think, because, but I couldn't be happier, honestly, with the discussion. And it was actually completely in line with my original plan, was to just go over the temperaments. I didn't think we could cover them in that depth, but it's so rewarding to do so.
Like I said, I mean, after 8 years, like, this is my Star Wars. This is where I geek out. So when people know, all about Luke Skywalker's second cousin or whatever, like this is where I live. I can't help it. I can't turn it off. So
much fun. So I definitely, hopefully I can have you back here sometime soon.
Absolutely. Anytime.
Yeah, because we've got 4 quadrants to explore in terms of the 4 subtypes of each.
Well, we haven't even scratched the surface yet. When you start getting into
Oh,
like the self-image and like self-esteem,
yeah.
that's really where it gets fun. So
Yeah,
yeah,
so plenty to explore.
yeah, you let me know. I'll be happy to come back anytime.
All right, sounds good, Adam. Well, yeah, this has been a pleasure, and you have a great night.
Hey, you too. Thank you.